The November wind cut through Millbrook like a knife. The woman at the bus station didn't flinch. She sat frozen on the concrete bench, military uniform pristine despite the chaos written across her face, combat boots polished to perfection, hands shaking as they gripped a battered green duffel bag. Marcus Turner had driven past this corner every night for 3 years. Tonight, something made him slam the brakes. Through his cracked windshield, he watched this soldier drowning in plain sight. Her posture screamed discipline. Her eyes held wild desperation. He killed the engine and stepped into the bitter cold. The woman's head snapped up. For a split second, Marcus saw something that gutted him, the exact same look his wife had worn before she died. That hollow, defeated stare of someone who'd fought too hard for too long. "Ma'am," his voice cut through the silence, "you're coming with me." What Marcus didn't know was that this broken soldier would soon reveal a connection to his family that would turn his quiet life completely upside down. Marcus Turner was 38 years old and had been carved hollow by grief. 3 years had passed since cancer took his wife Lisa, leaving him to raise their 9-year-old daughter Emma alone in their small wooden house on the outskirts of Millbrook. The town sat just 20 minutes from Fort Liberty, where Lisa had once served as a military nurse before they married. Now Marcus worked nights at the lumber mill, coming home each morning to make breakfast for Emma and pretend that half his heart wasn't buried in Millbrook Cemetery. The routine had become his anchor. Coffee at 5:30, Emma's lunch packed by 6, school drop-off at 7:15, then home to sleep until 3 in the afternoon when Emma returned with homework and stories about her day. The woman at the bus stop looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, 29 years old, had been discharged from the Army just 12 hours ago. Not honorably, not with ceremony. She'd been escorted off base with nothing but her duffel bag and $47 in her wallet. The last bus to her hometown in Ohio had been canceled due to weather, and she had nowhere else to go. Her service record was impeccable. 8 years of exemplary duty, 3 deployments, commendations for bravery under fire. None of it mattered now. All that remained was the taste of betrayal and the crushing weight of starting over at 29, with nothing to show for nearly a decade of service. "I don't need your pity," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Marcus could see the military training fighting against her exhaustion. She was trying to maintain composure even as her world crumbled around her. Her uniform was wrinkled from sitting on the bench for hours, but her spine remained straight. Her chin lifted in defiance of circumstances beyond her control. Everything about her screamed discipline and pride, except for her eyes. Those told a different story entirely. "Not pity," Marcus replied, extending his hand. "Just a warm place to sleep." Something in his tone, genuine, without judgment, made her look at him differently. There was pain in his eyes, too, the kind that recognized itself in others. He'd seen that look in his own mirror for 3 years now, the expression of someone who'd lost everything that mattered and was still trying to figure out how to keep breathing. The November wind cut through both of them, but neither seemed to notice the cold anymore. Sarah hesitated, studying his face in the harsh streetlight. His beard was graying at the edges, his work clothes spoke of honest labor, and his eyes held the kind of sadness that came from genuine loss rather than self-pity. After a moment, she stood up, slinging her duffel bag over her shoulder with practiced ease. "One night," she said quietly. "Just one night." But as she followed him to the pickup truck, neither of them knew that one night would change everything. The engine coughed to life, and Marcus pulled away from the bus station, leaving behind the place where Sarah Mitchell's old life had officially ended. The Turner house was exactly what Sarah had expected from a widowed father. Clean but lived in, with the subtle chaos that comes from a man trying to be both parents at once. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, and there was a coffee mug in the sink with "World's Best Dad" printed on the side. The living room held the comfortable mess of a home where people actually lived. Books stacked on end tables, Emma's backpack thrown over a chair, a forgotten sweater draped over the couch. Sarah noticed a framed photo on the mantel. Marcus with a blonde woman in a navy blue sweater, both of them laughing at something off camera. The woman had kind eyes and a smile that suggested she laughed often. Even in the photograph, Sarah could see the love between them. the easy intimacy that comes from years of shared joy and sorrow. "That's Lisa," Marcus said from the kitchen, not needing to look. "My wife." He was making a sandwich, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times. His hands were steady, but Sarah noticed the way he avoided looking at the photograph, as if the image still had the power to stop him in his tracks. "She was a nurse, military like you. Served at Fort Liberty for 6 years before we married." There was pride in his voice when he spoke of her service, but also a deep sadness that suggested her absence was still a fresh wound, despite the passage of time. Sarah's breath caught. She served at Fort Liberty? The question came out sharper than she intended, and she saw Marcus pause, mayonnaise jar halfway to the counter. His eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion but with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read between the lines of what people said and what they meant. Sarah felt her heart racing, memories flooding back of blonde hair and bright laughter, of shared coffee in the mess hall and long conversations during downtime between shifts. Lisa Turner. Lisa Rodriguez, as she'd been known then. Sarah had known her, had served beside her, had called her friend. "Yeah, for 6 years before we married." "Did you know her?" There was something careful in his voice now, as if he was afraid of the answer. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, the choice between truth and protection, between connection and self-preservation. "No," Sarah lied smoothly, the deception sliding off her tongue with practiced ease. "It's a big base." But her hands were shaking again as she accepted the sandwich, and she could feel Marcus watching her with new intensity. She had known Lisa Turner, had served with her, had been her friend. They'd shared stories about their families, their fears, their hopes for the future. Lisa had talked about Marcus constantly, about the carpenter she was going to marry, about the children they wanted to have, about the life they were building together. Sarah had been deployed to Germany when Lisa left the service, and they'd lost touch, the way military friends often do. She'd never known Lisa's married name, had never connected the dots until this moment. They ate in comfortable silence, two people who understood that some pain was too deep for words. Sarah didn't ask why Marcus had stopped for a stranger in the middle of the night. Marcus didn't ask why a soldier was sitting alone at a bus station with nowhere to go. Some questions were answered better with time than words, and both of them seemed to understand that rushing toward explanations would only cheapen whatever was happening between them. The sandwich was good, simple but made with care, the kind of meal that spoke of someone who'd learned to find comfort in small gestures. Sarah realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the food tasted better than anything she'd had in months. When Emma Turner bounced into the kitchen the next morning, she found a stranger sitting at their table, folding a blanket with military precision. The 9-year-old stopped short, her backpack sliding off her shoulder, and stared at Sarah with the unguarded curiosity that only children possess. Sarah looked up, and for a moment, she saw Lisa's eyes staring back at her. The same bright blue eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. The resemblance was unmistakable and heartbreaking, like seeing a ghost made flesh. Emma had her mother's coloring but Marcus's serious expression, and Sarah could see both parents in the way she carried herself, confident but cautious. "Hi there," Sarah said softly, making sure her voice was gentle and non-threatening. "You must be Emma." The girl nodded, suddenly shy in the way children become when confronted with the unexpected. Sarah had always been good with kids. It was one of the things that had made her effective as a soldier, the ability to connect with civilians in war zones, to make children feel safe when the world around them was falling apart. Emma's gaze fixed on Sarah's uniform, hanging neatly over a chair. "Are you a soldier?" The question was asked with a kind of reverence that only children possess, as if Sarah were something special and important. Sarah felt the familiar stab of loss, the reminder that she was no longer what she'd been, no longer worthy of that kind of respect. "I was," Sarah replied, the past tense cutting deeper than expected. "I used to be." The words felt like a betrayal of everything she'd worked for, everything she'd believed in. For 8 years, being a soldier had been her identity, her purpose, her calling. Now she was just another veteran, trying to figure out how to be a civilian again. Except she hadn't chosen this transition. It had been forced on her by men who cared more about protecting their own than doing what was right. Marcus appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work in his flannel shirt and steel-toed boots. "Emma, go get ready for school. Sarah, you're welcome to stay until the next bus." He paused, studying her face with the same intensity he'd shown the night before. "It doesn't leave until 6 tonight." There was something in his expression, a mixture of concern and curiosity, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle but wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Sarah nodded, grateful for the reprieve. "Thank you. I'll be gone by the time you get home." But as she watched Marcus help Emma with her backpack, checking to make sure she had her lunch money and her homework, she found herself hoping that wasn't true. There was something about this house, about the way Marcus moved through his morning routine with quiet competence, about the way Emma chattered about her upcoming math test, that made Sarah want to stay. It felt like a real home, the kind of place where people took care of each other, where love lived in the small daily rituals of family life. The house felt different when they were gone, quieter but not empty. Sarah had grown used to the constant noise of military life, barracks chatter, drill sergeants shouting, the rumble of vehicles, the organized chaos of army life. This silence was profound, almost sacred, the kind of quiet that came from a home where people were genuinely content. She spent the day cleaning, unable to sit still, unable to stop her mind from racing over everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She fixed the squeaky door hinge with a can of WD-40 she found in the garage, reorganized the spice rack by alphabetical order, and repaired the loose step on the back porch using tools from Marcus's well-organized workshop. Working with her hands felt good, familiar, like a connection to her grandfather and the skills he'd taught her before the army claimed her life. When Marcus returned that evening, he found his house transformed. The small repairs he'd been putting off for months were completed, surfaces were spotless, and there was a pot of coffee brewing on the counter. "You didn't have to do this," he said, running his hand along the perfectly sanded porch rail. There was wonder in his voice, as if he couldn't believe someone had cared enough to fix the things he'd been ignoring. The house felt different, not just cleaner, but more alive, as if Sarah's presence had awakened something that had been sleeping since Lisa died. "I couldn't just sit there," Sarah replied, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "And I wanted to thank you." She was wearing civilian clothes now, jeans and a plain white t-shirt she'd bought at the local thrift store. But she still carried herself like a soldier, straight-backed, alert, ready for whatever came next. The uniform was gone, but the bearing remained, the invisible armor that came from years of military discipline. Marcus found himself studying her face, looking for clues about who she really was beneath the careful composure. Emma burst through the front door, home from school and full of energy, her backpack bouncing against her hip as she ran. "Dad, look, the swing works again!" She ran to the backyard where Sarah had repaired the rope swing that had been broken for months. Marcus had meant to fix it countless times, but something always got in the way. Work, exhaustion, the simple, overwhelming nature of single parenthood. "How did you know how to fix it?" Emma called over her shoulder, already pumping her legs to build momentum. "You learn a lot of things in the army," Sarah said, watching Emma climb higher with each arc, her laughter bright and uninhibited. "Sometimes you have to fix things with whatever you have available." She remembered her grandfather's workshop, the patient way he'd taught her to use tools, to see problems as puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to be endured. The army had built on those skills, teaching her to improvise, to make do, to find solutions under pressure. Marcus stood beside her, both of them watching his daughter laugh for the first time in weeks. "Where did you learn carpentry?" he asked, genuinely curious. There was something about the quality of Sarah's work, the attention to detail, that spoke of real training rather than casual knowledge. "My grandfather," Sarah said, her voice softening with memory. "He was a contractor, taught me everything he knew before he died." She paused, remembering the smell of sawdust and the sound of his voice explaining the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. He used to say that working with your hands was the only honest work left in the world. During dinner, Emma peppered Sarah with questions about the military, her 9-year-old mind fascinated by the idea of life as a soldier. What was it like to carry a gun? Had she ever been in a real battle? Did she have to wake up really early every day? Did she know how to drive a tank? Sarah answered patiently, carefully editing her responses for child's ears, turning the harsh realities of military life into something that sounded almost like an adventure. She talked about the friends she'd made, the places she'd seen, the satisfaction of serving something bigger than herself. She didn't mention the fear, the exhaustion, the way war changed you from the inside out. She didn't talk about the nightmares or the hypervigilance, or the way civilian life felt impossibly soft and strange after years of military discipline. But when Emma asked why she wasn't wearing her uniform anymore, Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. The question was innocent, asked with the straightforward curiosity of a child who didn't understand that some topics were dangerous territory. Sarah felt Marcus's eyes on her, waiting to see how she would handle the moment, whether she would tell the truth or find a way to deflect. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult choices, she said finally, choosing her words carefully. And sometimes those choices mean giving up something you love. It was the truth as far as it went, but it was also a sanitized version of events that wouldn't traumatize a 9-year-old. The reality was messier, uglier, more complicated than Emma could understand. Marcus was watching her carefully, his expression thoughtful. "The right choice isn't always the easy one," he said quietly. There was understanding in his voice, as if he recognized the weight she was carrying. It was the kind of thing Lisa might have said, the sort of gentle wisdom that came from experience and compassion rather than judgment. After Emma went to bed, Marcus and Sarah sat on the front porch, drinking coffee and watching the stars emerge in the clear November sky. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace, and Sarah pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She had forgotten how quiet civilian life could be, how peaceful it felt to sit on a porch and watch the world settle into evening. In the army there was always noise, always activity, always the sense that something was happening or about to happen. This stillness was foreign, but welcome, like a balm for nerves that had been stretched tight for too long. Marcus disappeared inside and returned with a navy blue sweater, the same one Sarah had seen in the photograph. "This was Lisa's," he said, holding it out with careful hands. "She would have wanted someone to use it." Sarah hesitated, understanding the significance of the gesture. This wasn't just a sweater, it was a piece of Lisa's life, a tangible connection to the woman who had once worn it. The fact that Marcus was willing to share it spoke to something deeper than mere hospitality. "Are you sure?" she asked, accepting the sweater with reverent hands. The wool was soft, well worn, and when she pulled it on, it smelled faintly of lavender perfume and something else, something that might have been Lisa's natural scent. The fit was perfect, as if it had been made for her, and Sarah felt a strange sense of connection to the woman who had owned it first. "I'm sure," Marcus said, settling back into his chair. She believed in taking care of people. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two broken people finding solace in each other's company. The stars were bright above them, unpolluted by city lights, and Sarah could see the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light. She hadn't seen stars like this since her last deployment, hadn't realized how much she'd missed the simple pleasure of looking up at an infinite sky. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was discharged," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "Not honorably, not for anything I did wrong, but—" She trailed off, struggling to find the words that would explain 8 years of service ending in disgrace and betrayal. How could she make him understand what it felt like to have everything you'd worked for stripped away because you'd tried to do the right thing? "But you did what you thought was right," Marcus finished. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who understood that moral courage often came at a terrible price. There was no judgment in his voice, no curiosity about the details, just acceptance of the basic truth that good people sometimes suffered for their principles. Sarah nodded, feeling tears threaten for the first time since leaving the base. "There was an officer, Captain Bradley Morrison. He thought that because I was a woman I should be grateful for his attention." Her voice hardened as she spoke, the anger still fresh and raw despite the hours that had passed. "Cornered me in the supply room, told me that my career would go much smoother if I was friendlier to my superiors. When I refused, He made it clear that he could make my life very difficult. "So you reported him," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. He could see the integrity in her bearing, the strength that would have compelled her to speak up despite the risks. The anger in his voice was quiet but fierce, the controlled rage of a man who had raised a daughter and understood exactly what Morrison's actions represented. "I reported him," Sarah confirmed, "filed a formal complaint, documented everything, followed procedure exactly as I'd been trained. But Morrison had friends in high places, and I didn't. The investigation was a joke. They interviewed his buddies, dismissed my evidence, and concluded that I was a disgruntled soldier with a history of insubordination." She laughed bitterly. 8 years of exemplary service, and suddenly I was a problem employee who couldn't be trusted. "So they kicked you out instead of dealing with him," Marcus said, his hands clenching into fists. The injustice of it was staggering. A good soldier destroyed to protect a predator. The system closing ranks to maintain the status quo rather than confronting uncomfortable truths. They said I was disruptive to unit cohesion. 8 years of service, 3 deployments, commendations for bravery, and I walked away with nothing. Sarah's voice cracked, the emotional dam finally breaking. No pension, no benefits, no future. Just $47 and a bus ticket home to a town where nobody knows who I am or what I've done. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what she'd lost. "You did the right thing," he said finally, his voice firm with conviction. "That matters, even when it doesn't feel like it, even when the system fails you, even when the cost is higher than anyone should have to pay." Sarah felt tears she'd been holding back for days finally spill over. "I don't know what I'm going to do now," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to be anything but a soldier. It's all I've been for 8 years, all I've ever wanted to be, and now it's gone and I don't know who I am without it." "You're more than that," Marcus said, his voice gentle but certain. "You fixed Emma's swing. You repaired my porch. You made this house feel like a home again for the first time in 3 years. You're a person, not just a rank and serial number. You're someone who stands up for what's right, even when it costs you everything." The next morning brought new complications that would test everything Sarah thought she knew about starting over. She had decided to stay another day, unable to face the bus station just yet, and was helping Emma with her math homework when a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Through the window, Sarah watched Captain Bradley Morrison step out, his uniform crisp and his expression cold. He moved with the confident swagger of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions, someone who believed that rank and connections made him untouchable. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice, her military training kicking in as she assessed the threat and began planning her response. "Stay inside," Sarah told Emma, her voice sharp with command authority. "Don't come out no matter what you hear, understand?" Emma nodded, recognizing the tone of someone who expected to be obeyed without question. Sarah's entire demeanor had changed. The relaxed woman who'd been helping with homework was gone, replaced by the alert, dangerous soldier who'd survived 3 combat deployments. Morrison was already at the front door by the time Sarah opened it, his smile cold and predatory. "Mitchell, I thought I might find you here." His eyes swept over her civilian clothes with obvious disdain, as if her discharge had somehow made her less than human. "Nice little setup you've got. Playing house with the widower and his kid. Very touching. What do you want?" Sarah kept her voice steady, but her heart was racing. How had he found her? More importantly, why had he bothered to track her down when she was already out of the army and no longer his problem? The fact that he was here, in civilian clothes, on his own time, suggested that this was personal rather than official business. "We need to talk," Morrison said, his tone conversational, but with an underlying threat that made Sarah's skin crawl. "About our little misunderstanding." He glanced past her into the house, taking in the domestic scene with obvious calculation. "Nice place, cozy. Be a shame if something happened to it, or to the people who live here." Marcus appeared behind Sarah, his presence solid and reassuring. "Can I help you?" he asked, but his tone suggested he'd rather throw the man off his property than engage in conversation. He'd sized up Morrison immediately. The arrogant bearing, the implied threat, the way he was looking at Sarah like she was something he owned. "Captain Morrison," the officer said, not extending his hand. "I'm here to collect Sergeant Mitchell. She has some paperwork to sign." The casual way he said it, as if this were routine business, made Sarah's stomach turn. Morrison had always been good at making his predatory behavior seem normal, official, unavoidable. "I'm not signing anything," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'm a civilian now. You have no authority over me." But even as she said it, she knew that Morrison wouldn't have come here unless he had some kind of leverage, some way to hurt her even outside the military justice system. Morrison's smile widened, and Sarah saw the trap closing around her. "Actually, I do. You see, there's been a little mix-up with your discharge papers. It seems some classified materials went missing from your unit right around the time of your departure. Very serious stuff. The kind of thing that could land someone in military prison for a very long time." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Of course, these things can be resolved quietly if everyone cooperates." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "I never took anything classified, you know that." But she also knew that Morrison was smart enough to have planted evidence, to have manufactured a case that would be her word against his. In the military justice system, rank mattered, and Morrison outranked her by a significant margin. "Do I?" Morrison shrugged, his expression innocently confused. "All I know is that sensitive documents disappeared right around the time you were making your wild accusations against a respected officer. Funny how that works out, isn't it? Makes a person wonder about your real motivations." Marcus stepped forward, his carpenter's hands clenched into fists. "What exactly are you saying?" There was barely controlled violence in his voice, the protective instinct of a man who'd seen too much injustice already. "I'm saying that Sergeant Mitchell here can make this all go away by signing a simple non-disclosure agreement. Just a promise to keep certain recent events private, nothing more." Morrison's tone was reasonable, almost friendly, as if he were offering her a favor rather than extorting her silence. Sarah understood immediately. Sign the agreement and stay quiet about the sexual harassment, or face fabricated charges of theft that would destroy her completely. It was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its effectiveness. Morrison could claim to be protecting classified information, while actually protecting himself from the consequences of his actions. "And if I don't sign?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Morrison's smile told her everything she needed to know about the choice she was being given. "Then I'll have to file charges. Theft of classified materials, dereliction of duty, possibly even treason depending on what my investigators find." Morrison's tone was conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than the destruction of her entire future. "Of course, investigations like that can take years, and during that time you'd be in military custody, unable to work, unable to build a life, unable to play house with your new friend." Emma's voice came from the kitchen, innocent and worried. "Dad, is everything okay?" The sound of the child's voice seemed to galvanize Morrison, his smile becoming even more predatory, as he realized he'd found the perfect leverage. Marcus's jaw tightened, his protective instincts warring with his helplessness. "You're threatening her in front of my daughter?" The disbelief in his voice was palpable. He'd served in the military himself, knew that officers were supposed to be better than this, supposed to protect rather than prey on those under their command. "I'm not threatening anyone," Morrison replied smoothly, his voice pitched to sound reasonable and professional. "I'm simply explaining the situation. Sarah here has a choice to make. She can sign the papers and get on with her life, or she can spend the next several years fighting charges that will destroy her completely. It's really quite simple." Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing the helpless rage in his eyes, the way his hands trembled with the effort of not attacking Morrison where he stood. She thought about Emma, innocent and curious, asking questions about soldiers and service, with the wide-eyed admiration of a child who still believed in heroes. She thought about Lisa's sweater, still warm around her shoulders, and the way Marcus had looked at her when she'd fixed the swing. She thought about the life she might have had here, the family she might have become part of, the peace she might have found after 8 years of war. "I'll sign," she said quietly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The defeat in her voice was complete, the sound of someone who'd finally been beaten by a system that was supposed to protect her. Morrison pulled out a thick folder, his movements efficient and practiced. "Smart choice, really, Sarah, this is for the best, you'll see." He spread the papers across the porch table with the air of someone who'd done this before, who'd perfected the art of silencing inconvenient voices. "Just initial here, here, and sign at the bottom." Sarah picked up the pen, her hand trembling slightly as she scanned the document. The non-disclosure agreement was thorough and devastating, preventing her from ever speaking about Morrison's conduct to anyone: media, other military personnel, law enforcement, even therapists. It was a complete silencing, wrapped in legal language that made her complicity seem voluntary. With each initial, each signature, she felt a piece of herself dying, the woman who'd stood up for what was right, slowly being erased. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, his voice full of pain, "you don't have to do this." But they both knew that wasn't true. Morrison held all the cards, and he was willing to destroy not just Sarah, but anyone who mattered to her. "Yes, I do," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "For Emma. For you. For everyone who matters." She signed her name with a flourish, each letter feeling like a small death, a betrayal of everything she'd ever believed about justice and courage. Morrison gathered the papers with obvious satisfaction, his smile now genuinely warm. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mitchell. Oh, and Sarah, if you ever change your mind about our agreement, remember that these charges don't have a statute of limitations. I can file them anytime, anywhere, for any reason." Sweet dreams. After he left, Sarah and Marcus sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like a shroud. Emma had gone to her room, sensing the tension, even if she didn't understand its source. The house felt different now, contaminated by Morrison's presence, by the knowledge that evil could reach into even the safest spaces and corrupt them. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. "He's not going to stop, is he? Men like that never do." It wasn't really a question. They both knew that Morrison would continue his predatory behavior, emboldened by his success in silencing Sarah. "No," Sarah agreed, her voice empty of everything except exhaustion. "He'll just find another target, another woman who doesn't have enough power to fight back, another career to destroy, another life to ruin, and I'll have helped him by staying quiet. Unless someone stops him," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice, a quiet determination that made Sarah look at him more closely. His eyes had changed, hardened, as if he'd made some kind of decision while she wasn't looking. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though part of her already knew. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers who'd decided that some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the cost. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening sky. "I wasn't always a carpenter," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "Before Lisa got sick, I was a journalist, investigative reporting. I specialized in military corruption, defense contractor fraud, sexual harassment, cover-ups, that sort of thing." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "I still have contacts, people who would be very interested in a story about systematic abuse at Fort Liberty." Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time since Morrison had appeared on the porch. "Could you—" She couldn't finish the question. Couldn't allow herself to believe that there might be a way to fight back after all. "I'd need more than just your word," Marcus said, his journalistic training already kicking in. "Morrison's too smart to leave himself exposed, and he's got too many powerful friends. But if there were other women, other victims, who were willing to come forward—" He trailed off, letting Sarah fill in the blanks. "There were," Sarah said slowly, her mind already working through the possibilities. "Other women, other incidents? I heard rumors, stories that were never officially reported. Some of them were transferred, some forced out, some just disappeared from the system." She looked at Marcus, seeing the professional focus in his eyes. Could we really bring him down? We could try, Marcus said, but it would be dangerous. Morrison has resources, connections, the ability to make life very difficult for anyone who opposes him. And you've already signed that non-disclosure agreement, which complicates things legally. I don't care about the legal complications, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. I can't live with myself knowing that I helped him get away with this, that my silence will enable him to hurt other women the way he hurt me. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah moved her things into the Turner house, taking the guest room and carefully maintaining appropriate boundaries while she and Marcus began the painstaking work of building a case against Morrison. It wasn't romantic. Their relationship remained platonic, focused on the shared mission of seeking justice, but Sarah found herself becoming part of the family in ways she hadn't expected. She helped Emma with homework, cooked dinner when Marcus was working late, and slowly began to heal from the trauma of her discharge. Sarah reached out to former colleagues, women who had served under Morrison at various posts throughout his career. The process was delicate. Many of them were still active duty, afraid to speak out, or had been so thoroughly intimidated that they refused to even acknowledge what had happened. But slowly, carefully, a picture began to emerge of a predator who had been protected by the system for years. The stories were heartbreakingly similar. Unwanted advances, retaliation against those who resisted, career destruction for anyone who dared to speak up. Marcus used his old contacts to investigate Morrison's military record, following the paper trail of transfers and promotions that had allowed him to escape consequences time and time again. What they found was a pattern of behavior that stretched back nearly a decade. Morrison had been shuffled from base to base, always just before complaints could be formally filed, always with glowing recommendations from superior officers who were more concerned with avoiding scandal than protecting their subordinates. He's been doing this for years, Marcus said one evening, spreading documents across the dining room table. At least 15 women that we can document, probably more that we'll never know about. Every time someone complained, he was transferred to a new position, usually with a promotion. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, not just Morrison's crimes, but the institutional complicity that had enabled them. Sarah studied the files, her anger growing with each new revelation. How did he get away with it for so long? But even as she asked the question, she already knew the answer. Morrison had been protected by the old boys network, the culture of silence that valued unit cohesion over individual justice. Protection, Marcus said grimly. Morrison's father is a retired general. His uncle is a congressman. His brother-in-law is a defense contractor with billions in military contracts. He's got the kind of connections that make problems disappear before they can become public. The web of influence was vast and interconnected, reaching into every level of the military hierarchy. So, what do we do? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to understand that the answer would require more courage than she'd ever needed in combat. Marcus smiled for the first time in days, the expression of someone who'd found his purpose again. We make the story too big to ignore. We publish everything at once: names, dates, documentation, testimony from multiple sources. We make it impossible for them to cover it up or make it go away. 3 months later, the story broke simultaneously in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Military Times. Decades of sexual harassment covered up at Fort Liberty was the headline, with a byline that read, by Marcus Turner, with reporting by Sarah Mitchell and investigative assistance from the Coalition for Military Justice. The article was comprehensive, devastating, and impossible to ignore. 40 pages of documentation, testimony from 12 women, and evidence of institutional cover-ups that reached the highest levels of command. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Morrison was suspended pending investigation, his security clearance revoked, his career effectively over. Within days, a congressional hearing was announced, with promises of a full investigation into the culture of sexual harassment at Fort Liberty. Within weeks, Morrison was facing court-martial on multiple charges, and several of his superior officers had been relieved of command. But success came with a price that Sarah had anticipated but wasn't fully prepared for. Her name was now public, her story told to the entire country, her face on television screens from coast to coast. She received hundreds of messages of support from veterans and civilians alike, but also death threats from Morrison's supporters and vicious attacks from those who questioned her motives. The non-disclosure agreement she had signed proved to be unenforceable. Morrison's attempt to silence her through extortion had actually strengthened her legal position. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked one evening, finding her reading through emails on his laptop. The strain of the past few months was visible in her face, the weight of public scrutiny and legal proceedings taking its toll. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm also proud. For the first time in months, I feel like I did something that mattered, something that will make a difference for other women who come after me." Emma had been remarkably resilient through everything, seeming to understand in the way that children do that Sarah was fighting for something important. "You're like a superhero," she told Sarah one night as they worked on a school project together. "But instead of a cape, you have a computer." "Your mom was the superhero," Sarah replied, her voice soft with emotion. "I'm just trying to help people like she did." The comparison felt right. Lisa had saved lives as a nurse, and Sarah was trying to save careers, dignity, and faith in the military justice system. It was then that Emma dropped the bombshell that would change everything Sarah thought she knew about her connection to the Turner family. "Mom used to talk about you," she said casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. "She said you were the bravest person she ever knew." Sarah's heart stopped, the world tilting on its axis. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. "She had pictures of you," Emma continued, oblivious to the earthquake her words had caused, "in her memory box. She said you saved her life once and she never got to thank you properly." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, as if this were common knowledge, as if Sarah should have already known. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Emma, what pictures? But she already knew, had already guessed, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Emma ran to her room and returned with a wooden box that Sarah recognized as a military memory box, the kind that soldiers kept to preserve mementos from their service. Inside were photos, letters, and military commendations, but what caught Sarah's attention was a photograph she hadn't seen in years. Herself, in dress uniform, standing beside a hospital bed, where a younger Lisa lay recovering from shrapnel wounds. "That's from when Mom got hurt in Afghanistan," Emma said, her voice proud and excited. "She said you carried her to safety when everyone else was shooting. She said you saved her life." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, memories flooding back of that terrible day, of Lisa's blood on her hands, of the desperate race to get her friend to safety. Sarah's hands shook as she held the photograph, remembering the weight of Lisa's unconscious body, the chaos of the firefight, the way time had seemed to slow down as she made the decision to risk everything to save her friend. She'd been recommended for a Silver Star, but the paperwork had been lost in the chaos of deployment, and she'd never pursued it. What mattered was that Lisa had survived, had come home, had lived to build a life with Marcus and Emma. "She never forgot," Emma continued, settling beside Sarah on the couch. "She used to say that she got to marry Dad and have me because you saved her life. She wanted to find you again, but she got sick before she could." The innocent words carried the weight of destiny, of connections that transcended time and circumstance. Marcus appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of their conversation. "What's going on?" he asked, but his expression changed when he saw the photograph in Sarah's hands, saw the tears streaming down her face. Sarah held up the photograph, her voice breaking. "I saved her life," she whispered. "In Afghanistan, I saved Lisa's life." The words felt surreal, impossible, like something from a dream or a story rather than reality. Marcus stared at the photo, then at Sarah, understanding flooding his features. "That's why you looked familiar that night at the bus station. Lisa showed me this picture 100 times. She talked about you constantly, wondering what had happened to you, whether you were safe, whether you'd made it home from your deployments." His voice was filled with wonder and recognition, as if he were seeing Sarah clearly for the first time. "I didn't know," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know she was your Lisa until I saw her photo in this house, I thought she was just another nurse I'd served with, another face from the war." The magnitude of the coincidence was staggering. Of all the bus stations in all the world, Marcus had found her at exactly the moment when she needed saving most. "She was more than that," Marcus said quietly, sitting down beside them. "She was your friend, and she would have wanted you to know that Emma exists because of what you did, that our family exists because you were brave enough to risk everything to save someone you cared about." The revelation changed everything about their relationship, about Sarah's place in the Turner family, about the meaning of the connections that had brought them together. Sarah wasn't just a stranger who had wandered into their lives. She was the reason their family existed at all, the guardian angel who had made it possible for Lisa to come home from the war, to marry Marcus, to have Emma, to build a life that had been cut short by cancer, but had been beautiful while it lasted. "What does this mean?" Emma asked, looking between them with the serious expression of a child trying to understand adult emotions. "It means," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, "that Sarah is family. She always was. We just didn't know it yet." The words carried the weight of acceptance, of belonging, of a connection that went deeper than blood or marriage. 1 year later, the Turner house was filled with the sound of laughter and the smell of Sunday dinner, the warm chaos of a family that had found its way back to joy. Sarah had officially moved in, not as a guest, but as a permanent member of the family, her role undefined by traditional categories but essential nonetheless. She'd found work as a contractor, using the skills her grandfather had taught her to build and repair homes throughout Millbrook, her reputation for quality work spreading through word of mouth and satisfied customers. Morrison had been sentenced to 15 years in military prison, his conviction on multiple charges of sexual harassment, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice, sending shockwaves through the military community. The case had led to widespread reforms in how the military handled sexual harassment complaints, new training programs for officers, and a cultural shift that prioritized protecting victims over protecting the institution. Sarah had become an advocate for military women, speaking at conferences and congressional hearings, helping other victims find their voice and their courage. But more than that, she'd found her place in the world, her purpose beyond the uniform she'd worn for 8 years. She was Emma's unofficial guardian, Marcus's partner in all things, and the keeper of Lisa's memory. The navy blue sweater had become a symbol of connection and continuity, passed from Lisa to Sarah and eventually to Emma when she was old enough to understand its significance. It represented love that transcended death, friendship that survived war, and the mysterious ways that people found each other when they needed saving most. "Tell me about Mom again," Emma said one evening, curled up between Marcus and Sarah on the couch, her homework spread across the coffee table. At 10 years old, she was beginning to understand more about loss and love, about the complexity of adult relationships and the weight of memory. "She was brave," Sarah said, her voice soft with remembrance. "Braver than anyone I've ever known. She saved lives every day just by being who she was, by caring about people, by refusing to give up even when things seemed hopeless." The words carried the weight of truth, of genuine admiration for a woman who had embodied the best of military service. "And she brought us together," Marcus added, his arm tightening around both of them. "Even after she was gone, she was still taking care of us, still making sure we'd find each other when we needed it most." The idea of Lisa as a guardian angel, orchestrating their meeting from beyond the grave, had become part of the family mythology, a comforting explanation for the impossible coincidence that had brought them together. Emma nodded solemnly, her young mind processing the idea of love that continued after death. "I'm glad she saved you, Sarah. And I'm glad you saved her. It's like a circle that keeps going and going." Sarah smiled, pulling the girl closer, feeling the warmth of family love that she'd never expected to find. The best kind of circle, one that keeps growing, keeps including more people, keeps making the world a little bit better. Outside, the sun was setting over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Sarah felt a deep sense of peace that had eluded her for most of her adult life. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, the Turner house glowed with warmth and love, a beacon of hope in a world that too often seemed dark and cruel. Inside, a single father had found hope again. A broken soldier had found purpose, and a little girl had learned that the best families were the ones you chose rather than the ones you were born into. The bus station, where Marcus had found Sarah, was empty now, waiting for the next lost soul to need rescue. But in this house on the hill, 3 people had discovered that sometimes being rescued meant learning how to save others. And sometimes the greatest gift you could give someone was simply saying, "You're coming with me."